Good day, everybody. Dave Walker here again. And as part of our series that we've partnered with Accenture, we're presenting really what I would describe as best-in-class thinking around how to manage the challenges of being in the B to SMB space. So we've kind of started with a very, very broad set of research projects that Accenture has done over the course of the last 18 months, specifically about small businesses and those businesses that serve them. And we've revealed from that some very, very, what I will describe as hot topics and things that we all should really be thinking about. The first one that we really thought about was segmentation and how does one approach small business segmentation. The second one was the challenges of scaling, both verb and noun scale in this business to small business space. And the third one is really around this discovery that I think we're all getting awakened to about the power of peer-to-peer networks in the small business ecosystem. And we're going to talk about what those are. We're going to talk about the impact that those have. And we're going to talk about the role that they play in successful strategies going forward in 2022 and beyond, as it relates to doing our jobs of winning and keeping and growing small business customers. So your guides on this journey, and I think they are terrific guides, are Kelley Harris of Accenture. Welcome, Kelley.
Hi, Dave. Great to be here.
And Jane Sunde. Welcome, Jane.
Hey, Dave. Great to be here. Very excited for our discussion today.
Great to have you here. Everyone, I think, knows who Accenture is, but they might not know who you are. So if you guys wouldn't mind just doing a brief introduction of yourselves and the practice you work in, the things that you're passionate about as relates to the work and the assignments that you get. So Jane, why not start with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Dave. So as Dave already mentioned, my name is Jane Sunde. I'm a senior manager in Accenture's strategy and consulting practice, focusing specifically on customer sales and service. That's my particular practice, which as it sounds, it's really about how do we interact with different customers on behalf of a variety of different clients. And for me specifically, over the past several years, I've had the opportunity to really focus in the small business marketing space, working with a variety of enterprises on how they best serve their SMB segments across tools, programs, and other offerings.
Awesome. And Kelley, how about you?
Yep, Kelley Harris here, also a senior manager within Accenture. I am part of the same group and practice as Jane, so we're one and the same on the same team. And to echo some of the sentiments Jane was sharing, I really work with my clients to think about customer experience, to help them innovate in their front offices. So how do they engage their customers across marketing, sales, and service? And more specifically, over the last year or so, I've been focused in on SMB and helping enterprise clients think about, better understand, and better interact with and build relationships with their SMB customers.
Awesome. So back in the spring, I think it was the late spring, you guys fielded some research on, had this notion that peer-to-peer networks were a topic of importance for our market space. And why don't you guys walk us through, however you'd like, kind of the high level findings from that research and the implications that it has on strategically how we address small business customers and their peer-to-peer networks as brands.
Sure. Dave, you gave us a really great opener here, but as I think about the conversation we're about to have, from online reviews to influencers, we are living in a world that is increasingly about trusted communities and authentic recommendations. And the same holds true for small and medium-sized businesses. So over the course of the last year, Accenture has really dug into proprietary SMB research. We have surveyed and interviewed thousands of SMBs around the world. And one thing we've consistently seen as a theme and something that is just rung loud and true is the fact that peer engagement is crucial to how SMBs do business. And in May, as you suggested, we had wanted to dig a little bit deeper into this topic around peer engagement. So we had surveyed 600 SMBs across the US, the UK, and Australia. And really what we wanted to get a sense of was, one, better understanding why and for what reasons SMBs interact with their peers and where they go to their peers for advice and support. Two, really thinking about the experiences that SMBs are going through today and what pain points or challenges that they are experiencing in their peer-to-peer interactions. And three, how can enterprise companies, how can B2B companies play a role in this space and meet the needs of SMBs and better improve that experience of their peer-to-peer interactions? So we've got several key findings here, and I think over the course of this conversation, we're going to bring in those relevant insights and recommendations, which will drive, I think, a pretty compelling conversation here.
That's awesome. And Jane, why it maybe one of the starting points for discussion of this research is, was there a real kind of evidence of why small businesses find their peers so important?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I think there's certainly, as some of the programs I've been involved in the past several years on behalf of some enterprises, there's evidence at some of these events. The enterprises sometimes provide some guidance or provide some training to these small businesses, from up on stage, kind of a presentation type format. But really what we observed was that these small businesses were, even more engaged in learning from each other, or opportunities where we had small businesses on panels speaking directly to small businesses. And so that was sort of some anecdotal observations that led us to really want to dig into this further.
And was it because they didn't trust the large brand representatives, or it was just it just helped them, it reassured them that it felt more authentic if they were hearing it from a fellow buyer?
I think it's the second one. I don't know if it's necessarily lack of trust in the brand ambassadors, because I think that enterprises, were very much seen in this situation as experts in their own products and services they're presenting on. But I think it's a little bit more authentic to hear it from a peer. And additionally, I think it maybe was felt a little more attainable, a little more real. Oh my gosh, if this is how my peer approached it, this is the success that they are now achieving, that's something that maybe I can apply more easily to my business, a little bit more applicable perhaps.
So Kelley, back in the early days of building BizHive back in 2011 and 2012, we found that in our peer-to-peer user groups, we had a lot of terrific interaction, but we definitely had some folks who basically said, I'm sorry, I don't trust my fellow business operators. I'm smarter than they are, or they're just at a different stage. Talk a little bit about this notion that not all peers are created equal, and what makes up a group a peer group that really is valuable to all members of that group?
Yeah, great question. And it's something that kind of came to light in this research that we had done. But you can envision what SMBs are looking for from their peers. They're looking for timely and relevant insights that are relatable because of shared experiences. So naturally enough, what we found through the piece of research was that SMBs are looking for peers that have some key characteristics. And the key characteristics of a valuable peer set were: one, being a part of the same industry; two, selling similar products or services; and three, really experiencing the similar challenges in where they are as a business. So those characteristics were top of mind when SMBs were thinking about what's a valuable peer set for me and where am I going to get the most insight.
And maybe the first two are somewhat obvious. Sure, I want to talk to businesses that are like mine, or selling the same products and services, but facing the same challenges. Unpack that a little bit. What do you think they meant?
Yeah, sure. And I think this comes back to, why are peers so important to SMBs, right? And, really what we found is that SMBs trust their peers more than any other group. 80% of the SMBs we surveyed said that they found value from their peer engagement and it contributed to business outcomes.
Interesting.
And with SMBs or small business owners being time constrained or resource constrained, the fact that they don't have, the luxury of a large function behind them, like the marketing department or the IT shop, they're really looking to their peers for timely and relevant and reliable advice quickly. And, coming back to your question around the similar challenges, you take that, I like to take a step back here and think about, what we've just experienced with the pandemic. If you think about those early weeks and months into the COVID-19 pandemic, where SMBs and small business owners are reacting to rapidly changing federal and local health regulations, dramatic shifts in remote and hybrid work, rapidly changing customer expectations on things like touchless payment and delivery services, and sitting in the parking lot waiting to get into your dentist appointment or your doctor's appointment. They're looking to their left and they're looking to their right and they're saying, what are you doing? And how can I make sure I am, up to speed on what I need to be doing for my business? Kind of reinforcing this point on the importance of peers. We found that almost 60% of those that we surveyed were actively a part of a peer network or community.
Do you see most large brands participating in existing small business communities or forming their own small business communities, or combination of the two? How do you see most brands actually using this powerful small business peer-to-peer network? Either one. Jane, take that one.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to take that one. I mean, I think actually, based on what the research says, and actually based on what we've seen, based on successes enterprises or larger businesses are having with these communities, it really depends on what the purpose of their interaction with the small businesses is. I think what we've seen based on the research actually is that SMBs in the pre-sale process, before they purchase an enterprise, product or service, they really trust their peers more than an enterprise voice. And so in those situations, I think what we see being most successful and what we'd recommend is that, enterprises are seeking existing communities of small businesses to join and to kind of kick off some word of mouth type marketing. And so it can feel a little bit salesy in those situations if enterprises are truly, pitching their products or setting up a forum or a community solely for the purpose of pre-sales marketing. It can feel a bit more authentic to allow and participate in a conversation in which, SMBs are already having conversations and maybe kind of, seeding a discussion about their product. And so in the pre-sales portion, I think that would be kind of what we see being most successful and what we'd recommend. On the flip side, and this is also supported by research as well, after an SMB has purchased a product or service, that's where they're actually really looking for the enterprise to help them or to be the expert. That's where their trust of the enterprise is highest. And so in those situations, we actually think it behooves an enterprise to, set up their own community or network or forum to discuss, because it actually really enables the enterprise to provide, customer support or customer guidance in a really personalized but yet scaled way, where the enterprise can really be seen in their best light as an expert, kind of helping these small businesses to really effectively use their product. This can actually come at a benefit to the enterprise as well, because it can be a way for them to really scale their marketing support effectively, as well as potentially gain insights into, how their product's actually being used and how they may want to adjust the product in the future to better serve SMBs. So I think in summary, we see enterprises using it, both joining existing forums as well as establishing their own. And I think our recommendation as far as what would be most effective really depends on the outcome that the enterprise is trying to drive.
Exactly what they're trying to do.
Yes.
So
exactly.
Both of you are subject matter experts on experience, customer experience specifically. What are the recommendations that you make, Kelley, to your clients as far as the kind of experience that they should try to create with a peer-to-peer network that they're trying to establish on their own, as well as the experience that they're trying to create? And Jane kind of touched on this in the peer-to-peer groups that they may join, existing groups that they may join.
Sure. And I think, maybe before I answer your question, Dave, it's good to kind of think about those challenges and pain points that the SMBs are saying that they're experiencing today when they're going through peer-to-peer interaction and kind of engaging with online communities. And what we found is that the top 3 pain points that they're sharing with us are unhelpful content, unsuitable or irrelevant peer sets. So we talked about that a little bit. And, the third one being unsuitable volume of posts and messages and content. So noise and relevancy. So when I think about recommendations and a few best practices for B2B enterprises to keep in mind as they think about either building their own community or in getting engaged in existing communities, I think it's threefold. First, and probably the most important, is being authentic and value add. So going in, being a resource first, and knowing that the sales will come when the time is right. It's about creating an environment where your target audience, you are attracting and engaging and supporting conversation. That connection goes to conversation, goes to ultimately sales. But if the enterprise keeps in mind that that's a longer term game and they're going in with value add first, I think they're going to be more set up for success. I think a second point would be around, again, creating the right community, bringing together the right peer sets into the community and curating that a bit. SMBs are looking for more private, curated groups to make sure that those insights are relevant, timely, and actionable, and they're easy to find. So as an enterprise, it's good to keep that in mind as you think about when creating the community, managing the community, monitoring and maintaining the right people that are joining to keep that relevancy. And then I think a third one would be around playing the right role and finding, really anchoring to content and community management best practices and figuring out the balance between community management and then letting the community or network grow naturally and grow and support one another.
Wow, that is incredibly well articulated. Jane, that's a tough act to follow. I don't know if you would like to add anything to that.
No, I think that was incredibly, it is indeed a tough act to follow. I mean, I think from there, happy to discuss a little bit about sort of how you might think about managing a community, particularly if it's one that as an enterprise you're setting up. And I think back to Kelley's point, it really comes back to, setting the right expectations and then managing the community accordingly. And on the point of setting expectations, I think there's, 2 or 3 key things you should be doing. I think the first is, making it very clear in a community charter type format, what is the purpose of this community and then who can be involved? Is it focused on tech support for a specific product? If so, it may make sense to keep the community relevant to restrict to validated purchasers. If it's focused on an industry specific product, similarly, and maybe perhaps obviously, it's probably best to maintain that to SMBs relevant from that industry so that the topics are relevant to everyone. And then I think from there, clear community guidelines and policies and then a management approach needs to sort of follow from that charter. So the guidelines should be things around, what types of topics and questions will be allowed or addressed in the group. Key things to think about is also, to be honest, what won't be allowed in the group. So that kind of everyone is, clear on expectations, and you're also really maintaining a great space that's focused on the actual topics at hand for the SMBs to really build community. And then following from that is your community management approach. And so with this, I think the key thing to Kelley's very well articulated point is that you want to build a space where SMBs feel confident interacting with each other and are able to form relationships. And ideally, SMBs are actually getting advice from their peers, as that's what they're so looking for, as seen by the research and actually seen in practice as well. But at the same time, it's also really important as an enterprise that you're making sure that the information, to maintain trust, the information that's being shared is accurate. And so that's where really making sure you've got the appropriate management in place to maintain your community guidelines.
So maintaining community guidelines, or just the whole notion of managing a herd of cats, all these small businesses who kind of have their own opinions, experiences, I've never found small businesses to be shy about saying what they need or want or how they feel about a product or a service. So how light, how heavy a touch does it require to be successful in managing these communities?
Sure. I mean, I think, Dave, that really actually depends on the community and the products that we're talking about and the industries that we're talking about. So I think I'll start sort of with the basics of sort of what is needed for any one of these communities to be successful. And then we can talk about, there's some specific types of communities where I think you actually may need a little bit of a heavier touch. So in any community, I think there needs to be enough management in place to really make sure that it's, again, a safe space to convert, topics are staying relevant, information is staying accurate. Additionally, I think it'd be very helpful in any community to make sure that the enterprise is also providing relevant input, relevant content to the topic, things like thought leadership, technical advice, those types of things, again, dependent on the purpose of the group. But I think in general, in most situations, the goal is to try to keep it, really being mindful of when the enterprise is stepping in and when the enterprise is kind of allowing SMBs to conclude the discussion. And in general, my guidance would be to keep it as light touch as possible, keep it as focused on the SMBs, discussing their own discussion, while at the same time making sure information is accurate. That being said, I think if you're in an industry like healthcare or financial, where some of the information shared, if it's inaccurate, could really affect someone negatively, or also could decrease the trust of your group members if it were allowed to perpetuate. That's where I think we'd recommend sort of a little bit of a higher touch management strategy. And in those cases, you may want to consider things like having your community managers ensuring that they're experts in the space, being really thoughtful about when you're allowing open discussion versus when you're sort of allowing only, either approved SMBs in the group or your community managers to respond to questions, just because it's really important to avoid, lack of trust or lack of authenticity by having inaccurate information being perpetuated through your group.
So Kelley, we are probably all using these different groups, particularly those groups that we own, as means of collecting intelligence and insight into what our customers are thinking and doing. And sometimes it's even down to an individual basis. Is that something that you believe that, again, from to reinforce trust and authenticity, that we disclose that to user groups, or is it something that they can kind of, just like so many user groups or so many chat groups that we belong to in social media, you're being watched and that you're being kind of listened to, but you don't really need that disclosure. But what would you recommend as far as your interaction with small business?
I would say that, as part of, what Jane was articulating around the charter and the guidelines, there's a level set, right? And that will drive transparency and honesty and authenticity throughout at the onset. Peer-to-peer networks and these online communities are a great way for enterprises to better understand the voice of the SMB and get an appreciation for their needs and what they're looking for, to better cater to them as a company, be it enhancements to products and services and features, or the way they engage them in their other channels for sales and support. It's a great opportunity at a lower cost to really have innovation at the forefront and have that voice of the SMB inform your roadmap.
Jane, is again, you think about the process of building from scratch your own small business peer-to-peer network, or taking what you have existing and realizing that, this doesn't really do as much as we need to rethink it, or frankly, glomming on to some other existing small business network. Are there, if you're sitting down with a client for the first time in any of those scenarios, are there some very consistent and common things you say to them or questions that you ask that kind of set the journey on its start?
Yeah, absolutely. There are definitely a few things, Dave, that I think can help to kind of set the journey in the beginning in that type of situation. I think it really comes back to sort of what is the ultimate purpose, of this group. And to your point, if there's an existing, forum or community that's not as successful, what's happening that, we don't want to see happening currently. And I think then, from there, I think you can then sort of provide a recommendation. I think as, we were discussing earlier, I think there's times when, joining an existing group makes a lot more sense, particularly when, we're really looking for where the enterprise may not be as trusted in that point of the sales process or the things that we're trying to do. Whereas there's other areas where, if it's a highly regulated product or service, we really are looking to support people after they've purchased the service. That's a situation where, we probably recommend, this is where you really want to set up your own network. And then I think for the middle scenario where maybe they have a community that's not working, I think it's maybe potentially looking at some of the factors that Kelley mentioned earlier in terms to try to understand why it's not working. Is it an issue of sort of are the members all relevant to each other? Are the topics relevant? Is the conversation relevant? And then kind of going from there to maybe redefine what the purpose of that group is and work to kind of get it back in that direction, whether that's a change in how we're managing it or a change in the content that the enterprise is sharing. There's a few, those types of things what we'd look into.
Kelley, anything to add? Anything as you sit down with clients and talk about the journey of building, their capabilities in a peer-to-peer network? Anything that you find yourself so commonly asking that, or addressing as you meet a client for the first time?
Yeah, I think, I'm going to come back to maybe that first principle that I shared earlier on authenticity and value add. And I think, we get some questions around what is authentic? What does that look like? What are some actual tactics that I can employ to pull that off? And we talked about one already, which is do less selling and go in with that value add and be a resource first. But I think to add to that, there are some other tactics you can employ as well. Brand value. Get your brand values right and carry that through in your messaging and your content in the community. That will be hugely impactful in sharing your mission and your purpose and reinforcing that with your customers and your community. Create, I'm going to call it create for human, but this is all about, don't let things like SEO or strategic marketing tactics dilute or override your authentic voice. Keep it human. Mm-hmm. Mention this a little bit, but not in this practice, but listen. Employ customer listening. Start to get an understanding for the voice of the SMB and use that to positively impact how you curate or you personalize some of your messages and how you interact with them within the community. And then I think, one more that we, Jane, you and I often talk about is, embracing user-generated content. And I'm going to come back to some of the things that Jane was saying around community management, because there are some considerations here, especially with the type of industry you might be in, if it's more regulated. But more often than not, that user-generated content comes across as more authentic. Mm-hmm.
And do you, just as a subset question really quickly, do you believe that it's appropriate within these peer-to-peer networks, particularly those that you are operating as a brand, that you have both ambassadors from your side, but also really try to cultivate ambassadors and leaders within that peer-to-peer community? Don't just kind of let it happen. Really try to find those people who are good, articulate users who not necessarily are even fans, but are just really, really good and motivated to help others in the peer-to-peer network. Is that important to really try to cultivate? Jane, I'll address that to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's definitely important, Dave, to try to cultivate, either to find sort of the super users or to just in general cultivate engagement within your group. And I think you bring up a really good point that they don't necessarily have to be the ones who are using the most advanced products or using the most products. It can really just be the individuals who are most interested in, sharing their experience or, speaking to others, connecting with others about their experience. And so I think there's a few different ways to sort of simply identify them. I think that comes back to sometimes, I think as Kelley mentioned, user-generated content is often the most authentic. Sometimes, especially if a community is getting started or maybe a community is stalled a little bit, sometimes as community managers, you sort of have to maybe encourage that. And so there's things you can do in terms of either asking for, people to introduce themselves or asking people for input on something that can kind of encourage that engagement, as well as, as you kind of see the people who are always responding first or responding most effectively, as a community manager, you're responding to them and thanking them for their input and trying to figure out a way to encourage them to continue, particularly while you're sort of waiting for other members, SMB members of the community, if applicable, to sort of catch up with the conversation. I think it's really important to reinforce that type of engagement that we really want to see in these communities.
And last question is, do you think it's a good idea or a bad idea if you have a large population of associates within a B2SMB brand that are touching the customer, whether it's in the sales process, the customer service process, even the financial process? Is it a good idea or a reasonable idea to actually have them participate in some of these peer-to-peer networks and communities? Or should you fence it off and say, no, it's really only for the small business? Or is there an opportunity to create something that frankly more intertwines the communities on both sides of the ecosystem?
I think there's a few different ways to approach that. I think I would say first and foremost, I think it's incredibly critical for an enterprise to understand their customers and to really get the opportunity, and for all members, to your point, across the different departments and products and services, to get to actually have an opportunity to interact with the customers and understand the customers, are using their products, and also maybe even more about the customers and the challenges and the considerations that they have in their day-to-day lives. They're running their businesses, particularly with small businesses who tend to be both resource and time constrained. In terms of their interaction with this community of small businesses, I think there's a few different ways to structure that. I think in some cases, depending on the community, the relative community size relative to the number of people in your enterprise who are trying to get involved, I think there's, you can have it structured a little bit as, initially maybe there's some groups within your enterprise that are mostly kind of observing and understanding versus interacting directly. I think you can also create opportunities really to create some really authentic content for enterprise, or maybe you have a few members who are sharing some content in the group, introducing themselves, saying, I work in this part of the enterprise, and I'd really love to get your feedback on this. Interacting with SMBs that way, that's truly authentic. They're saying they're not an SMB, they're saying they're from your enterprise, but actually that they're very interested in the small business feedback. And then I think the third thing is, again, depending on the relative size of your community, you can also potentially have some of your enterprise team members participate in some of the community management. If that's something that they're able to incorporate into their jobs that works within the structure of your community, that can also be a really interesting way to have them have a role within your small business community you're establishing, that will allow them to both gain some customer insights, but also contribute in a way that doesn't, take away from sort of the small business peer-to-peer interaction that you're trying to encourage.
Great answer. Kelley, last question to you. Was there any evidence in the research of the positive financial impact behind this? In other words, as we said in another session, picture yourself in the ubiquitous windowless conference room, and you're pitching the proposition that we're going to invest in really creating this great peer-to-peer network, for our own business. And the representative from finance is sitting in the corner and basically saying, what's the ROI on this? Was there any evidence in the research that showed those who pay attention to positively helping those peer-to-peer networks see an actual a positive result in business?
So it's a great question, Dave. We surveyed the SMBs, so I can't speculate on an answer there, but that sounds like a great part 2 to our research here. So we'll have to take that back.
Sold. We'll commission that next week. I think that it doesn't take a big leap of logic to say, of course, there's a positive financial impact, and it's either in the form of reducing the costs of selling, from prospecting all the way to closing and every qualifying step in between, and it reduces the cost of servicing after the sale, because if you don't have to answer the question with your own account expert, and a peer is answering it, and that's actually the more trustworthy answer, boy, that's a win all the way around.
100% agree. I think for enterprises, considering this, it's an opportunity not to miss, both from an opportunity to build trust and relationship with your SMB customers, and also scale SMB success at a lot lower cost profile. And I know you had talked about that in a previous segment, and how enterprises can be thinking about doing that successfully. This is one mechanism.
Absolutely a terrific session, guys. There's a high bar was set, and you met it fantastically well. And I think that I'm very appreciative of how you laid this out and articulated it. And as we look at the kinds of topics that we want to really bring to life inside of this cooperative center of excellence, this is certainly one of them. And it seems like nothing is easy in the B2 SMB space, but this seems like one that is a no-brainer. And if you're not doing it currently, why? And if you are doing it currently, could you do it better? Either one of those leads to lots of great potential work for the course of 2022 and beyond. Thank you so much for doing this, both of you. Thank you, Jane.
Yeah, thank you so much. Happy to do it. And thank you so much for having me.
And Kelley, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave. It was a pleasure to be with you today. And thank you again for allowing us to join you in this conversation.
Thanks.